to the advancement of science and the rich and lasting legacy that he left behind for the benefit of the community and posterity. Professor Kottegoda was the General President of the SLAAS in 1979. As you know, he was a polymath with a Catholic taste. Thus, he was broad-minded in taste and interest and was free from provincial prejudices and parochial attitudes. He was a multifaceted character and was painting on a white canvas, going beyond medical ethics, his forte. Photography, botany, wildlife, classics, and opera were some of his key diversions. Though short-statured, he was an imposing mountain in the academic and scientific landscape of the country and was held in high esteem by the academic and scientific fraternity of the country. He distinguished himself as a medical doctor, researcher, academic administrator, botanist, pharmacologist, and photographer, and was a guru par excellence. I am therefore truly delighted to deliver the welcome address on this occasion commemorating this illustrious son of Sri Lanka. First and foremost, on behalf of the SLAAS, I wish to extend a most warm and cordial welcome to the beloved family members and relatives of the late Professor Kottegoda, who are joining this function from home and abroad, in person and online. Buddhi Marambe, Senior Professor in Crop Science of the University of Peradeniya, who will deliver the commemorative oration, has become a household name in view of his remarkable contribution in the field of agriculture and environment. He is an accomplished scientist with a commendable grasp of issues in agriculture and environment. He regularly enlightens and sensitizes planners, policymakers, as well as general public on actionable solutions to the existential problems and the threats that our country is faced with in agriculture and environment. He is truly a national asset. It is quite fitting that the Ethics Committee of SLAAS has invited him to deliver the commemorative oration. He has come all the way from Peradeniya to deliver the oration. We most heartily and cordially welcome you on this occasion. Also present in our midst are distinguished invitees, past general presidents, the general president-elect, general secretaries, treasurer, sectional president, council members, and the members of the SLAAS. I extend a most warm and cordial welcome to you. I am certain that SLAAS will uphold this tradition for many years to come. Thank you.
I don't think our speaker needs too much of an introduction. As the General President mentioned, he has become a household name in this country, but we do need to go to the formalities. And so I will call upon, in the absence of the chairman of the Ethics Committee, who is unfortunately out of the country, I would like to call upon the Vice Chairman, Professor Udeni Navagamua, to give a formal introduction.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Our orator today, Professor Buddhi Marambe, members of the Kottegoda family, the General President, past General Presidents, and the Council members of the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the orator at this Kottegoda Memorial Oration organized by the Ethics Committee of the SLAAS. Professor Buddhi Marambe obtained his BSc degree in agriculture from the University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, and Master of Agriculture and Doctor of Agriculture from Hiroshima University, Japan. He has more than 30 years of experience as an academic at the Department of Crop Science of the Faculty of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya. His research interests include weed science, climate change adaptation, and food security. Professor Marambe has won the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Weed Science Society, IWSS, in 2022 for the contribution made to field of weed science. With more than 150 research publications, he has also won the Presidential Award and National Research Council NRC Merit Award in Sri Lanka for scientific research. Professor Marambe is the chairman of the National Invasive Species Specialist Group, NISSG, and the former chairman and a member of the National Experts Committee on Climate Change Adaptation, NECCCA, of the Ministry of Environment. He was a member of the government delegation on climate negotiations at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, during the past 11 years. He was also the Assistant Secretary of the Lanka Organic Agriculture Movement for the period 2001 to 2003. While being an academic, he has also served as a non-executive member of the boards of several private sector organizations, providing technical guidance to agricultural-related operations, and council member and executive committee member of many professional associations. Professor Marambe has provided his services as a consultant to the World Bank, ADB, European Union, UNDP, FAO, WFP, UNEP, ICRAF, and CIAT in nationally and internationally important issues related to climate change adaptation, food security, and agriculture. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Buddhi Marambe, the orator today. Thank you.
At this stage of the proceedings, it is customary for us to present the orator with a medal. The medal is in front of our General President. So may I call upon Professor Anjit Senuratne to present the medal to Professor Marambe. And now, Professor Marambe, the podium is yours. The rest of us will vacate it and move downstairs so we can listen to you better.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, the members of the Kottegoda family, the General President and the council members of SLAAS, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's needless to say how privileged and how happy I am to be here today as the orator of Professor S.R. Kottegoda Memorial Oration that's been presented today, probably for the 26th time, as I learned. Thank you very much for the members of the Ethics Committee for selecting me. My better half is a medical practitioner. And when I told her that I'm attending this S.R. Kottegoda Memorial Oration as the orator, the first question that popped up from her mouth is, what are you going to do at an oration where there's a medical professionals are involved in? I said, no, nothing doing. That's different. This time is going to be different. I know Professor Kottegoda's profession, the professional achievements and so on, but I'll be linking it up with agriculture, the ethical conduct and the professional conduct of people in agriculture that has brought a very difficult scenario to Sri Lanka that we are experiencing right now. What I'm going to propose, ladies and gentlemen, while thanking and while recognizing the contribution of Professor S.R. Kottegoda, especially in terms of ethics, medical ethics, and so on, but bring into the picture about the poor professional conduct and ethical conduct that was there with Sri Lankan professionals, I must tell you, which actually contribute to destroy our agriculture. So the end result would be what I'm going to propose at this segment after about 35 to 40 minutes is to propose some solutions to overcome and to make sure Sri Lanka revives, or in other words, we pull back and make sure we reach at least the situation that was there before 2021. And that's my effort in this 35 to 40 minutes. Here I go. Professor Sri Rama Kottegoda, I did not have a chance to get engaged with activities with this great gentleman, whom I learned a lot, thanks to this invitation as well, I must tell you. So all this information actually gave me a lot of impetus to come and speak at this particular occasion, because I think it's, as I told you, when such an invitation is extended, there's no way that you can say no to that. Even to speak for 1 hour and travel up and down for 6 hours from Kandy is still worth in doing so, and that's what I thought. So I accepted the invitation with pride, I must tell you, and to make sure that the thoughts of an agricultural scientist to be put forward at this very occasion that we are commemorating a great gentleman in the past. So I don't think I have to go through all these things because you all know Professor Kottegoda's achievements much more than me. So let me jump into the segment that I want to share my thoughts with you all. Sri Lankan agriculture, I'm sure you have heard, learned that it's in a turmoil right now. It was in a very bad shape some time ago, but we are recovering at this particular moment. In other words, we are at a recovery stage rather than looking at a growth phase of agriculture. Sri Lankan agriculture has evolved. I will let you know data, show you information, sound data to show you how that evolution has taken place and what went wrong, not because of climate change, not because of natural disasters, but because of man-made disasters. Poor decision-making, irrational decisions being made and implemented at a time the agriculture was progressing and trying to look after the food security of our country. Please do remember, agriculture alone cannot meet the food security of any nation. Our efforts, even at this particular moment, is to make sure the contribution of agriculture in achieving food security is maximized. That's our effort. Please do not think agriculture can do wonders. Agriculture cannot do wonders without other sectors coming into picture. And that's a point that I want to highlight at the very beginning to move forward. These two photographs that appeared on television and many other places in the mass media are in June 2021, as soon as the government at that time took a very unscientific decision where the Cabinet of Ministers on 27th April 2021 decided all of a sudden to ban two most important agricultural inputs, that's synthetic fertilizer and synthetic pesticide. And this ban came amidst criticism coming from all corners, but the government went ahead with that decision and giving a little bit of legal touch on 6th May 2021, just about 10 days later, where a gazette notification was issued, giving, as I told you, legal teeth so that the import-export controller of Sri Lanka Custom from that point onward will never allow the entry of synthetic fertilizer and pesticides imported from other countries. This decision was changed 7 months later on 30th November 2021, on the same year. But ladies and gentlemen, we are still experiencing the repercussions. That's what I said. Sri Lanka is currently, even right at this moment that I speak, is at a recovery phase. How long this recovery phase will go on? Something that we have to think very carefully. If we can quickly recover, then of course we can move into a growth phase. But we are not talking about any growth phases of agriculture at this particular moment. Let's try to go back to where we were. and start developing agriculture sector from that point onwards. That would be the way forward for all of us right now. If we are worried about food security, please do keep in mind, food security is national security. I don't think any one of us should tolerate any effort to destroy agriculture or negatively impact agriculture that will in turn affect and have bad repercussion, of course, negative consequences with respect to national security as well. So that's a key point that I want to mention at this particular time. These two photographs, 3 years old, I must tell you, 2 years old, for example, was taken in 2021 June. And the photograph on the top right-hand corner, probably the one that finally culminated at Golf Face. This is the largest ever farmer rally that I have ever seen in Nepal. In 2021, when the farmers came to the streets, there may have been political interference, but one important thing regarding farmer pricing elsewhere in the world as well is the farmers, they themselves come forward first, and then there'll be political interferences and intervention that come up to strengthen the case. And this is exactly what happened in Sri Lanka as well in 2021. Though many of the intellectuals did not understand the repercussions of this ill-fated decision that was taken by the government, where negative impacts was written all over from the day that the decision was made, farmers knew it much more than us. That's why the time that they had to spend in the paddy field, time that they had to spend in the tea plantations and so on, they simply ignored that, but got into the streets asking for what? Asking for inputs, nothing much. Inputs to continue with their agriculture. Please do remember, agriculture is not only their production capacity, what matters over there, it's their livelihood. They are producers and consumers. So it's the total livelihood of farming community depends on agriculture. You and me, in most of the cases, we are consumers. And that makes a massive difference when it comes to agricultural production, and such decisions are being made without looking at the evidences that have been made available through scientific research. Once again, 2 years ago, just 2 months ago, this was the scenario. Started in Udavalave. People were crying foul for water, irrigation water, not water for drinking purposes, but water to support agriculture, irrigation water. And that's what happened about 2 months ago. So there are two important things that comes into our picture, comes into our mind when you look at these pictures. The top two talks about a man-made disaster. The bottom two is talk about a natural disaster because water is one of the most precious natural capital that we have. But all in all, everything has ended up finally affecting our food security. That's the most important part, once again, to keep in mind when we continue with the session hereinafter. Why I decided to choose this topic, ladies and gentlemen, is because there's always an issue in Sri Lanka, and there's a struggle between understanding myths versus facts. That's where the problems have been in this country in most of the cases. We always would have loved to get into a different bus, superstition, rather than looking at the scientific evidences, and took the whole Sri Lankan economy into an entirely different direction, very unfortunately. And we, at this particular moment, that you listen to me and I speak to you all in front of you, we are living on other people's money, nothing else, because we are defaulted in paying our debts. We are living on other people's money and we are enjoying based on those things. But do remember that Sri Lanka was a country that was in the development pathway. But of course, there were certain issues, very unfortunately, that did not allow us to progress in that particular activity, to show a progressive future. And because mainly of these myths versus facts, or facts versus myths that I'm going to talk to you right now. Even in the recent past, I've been listening to these 3 points that's spoken by many people. I put it in italics because they are myths, not facts. What are these myths that people say? I'm going to disprove them, showing real scientific facts. That's my job today, to talk to you in an oration like this. The first thing, the whole world is moving towards organic agriculture and moving out of using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. That's one thing that a lot of people speak of, harp on in front of many learned audiences. Number 2, Sri Lanka uses the highest quantity of fertilizers among the South Asian countries. Number 3, Sri Lanka uses the highest levels of pesticides among the countries in South Asia. This is where the issues are. So let's look at the facts, but not focus on the myths. Number one, about the first myth that I'm going to disprove at this stage. And why I've been harping on this is that it's the professionals who brought these things forward, because they lost in their mind about the professional conduct, and they are lost in their minds about the ethical conduct in serving the society. This is where the biggest problem. But I also blame the politicians, ladies and gentlemen, at this particular stage. Anybody can express their views. Anybody can come up their arguments and so on. But our political leaders should have the wisdom and should have the capacity to comprehend and analyze whatever the other people say and decide on the best the country would require and draw a line between the truth and false. And that's what's lacking, very unfortunately, in Sri Lanka. So that many people were able to take the whole country on a ride because people did not understand, people did not comprehend the real facts that is happening at the ground level. So those are the points that I'm going to bring up at this particular stage. Look at the first thing, the whole world of agriculture, the whole world is moving towards organic agriculture and moving out of using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. Let's look at this scenario. The global cropland is still increasing. As you see, if you look at the data starting from 1,200 to 2020, about 2 years ago, you can still see the crop cultivation is expanding in the whole world. So this is a fact which is there, and agriculture takes place and agriculture continues. Crop science is part of it. Animal science is the second part that we have to remember. But I'm only talking about the crop productivity at this particular stage because I feel more comfortable in talking about that at this particular time. So this is the way the crop agriculture has increased. But look at this particular graph, which is in the box. I hope you see the purple color line here at the bottom. Purple color line. And that's the extent of organic agriculture that has taken place, and even that take place at the present context. And look at the top line. This is the way the conventional agriculture crop production take place. Just by looking at this gap, you can simply imagine how the world looks at organic agriculture. There's nothing wrong with organic agriculture. Please don't think that I'm blaming organic agriculture. My PhD is on composts. And I worked in Sri Lanka on effective microorganisms for about 10 years under the guidance of late Professor Ravi Sangakara. That's about biofertilizer. Then I was the Assistant Secretary for Lanka Organic Agriculture Movement, which I was able to revive and to have the first conference on organic agriculture in Sri Lanka in 2002. And then, of course, I also served, while being an academic at University of Peradeniya on invitation, I also served in the management or the boards of several private sector organizations who are in agribusiness. So that experience that I got working on both ends brought me to these conclusions based on facts. And that's the point that I'm going to make today. This is the thing that we all have to realize with respect to agriculture in the whole world. This is an important publication that came up in 2020, published by Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. What they did was, they did a calculation to show people how the use of fertilizer has taken place over the past 20 years in different continents in Sri Lanka. This is the result, ladies and gentlemen. Look at Africa, Americas, Asia in the middle, Europe, and Oceania. In all cases, although the magnitude of increase has changed, is different, but in all cases, the use of fertilizer has been increasing over the past 20 years. So why is that? This erroneous message being given to our policymakers by learned audiences. That's something that I do not understand and I cannot comprehend. More importantly, why is that our political leads could not understand the reality? And no one probably have educated them, or they themselves did not understand what is happening at the ground level. The unfortunate scenario is that. So please do keep in mind, the fertilizer usage has been increasing. The second point, a lot of people say Sri Lanka is the country that used highest levels of fertilizer in South Asia. Look at this World Bank data and look at where Sri Lanka is. Pakistan is above us. India is above us. Look at where Bangladesh is. Look at where Vietnam and look at where China is. This is a scenario with respect to use of fertilizer. Sri Lanka, after using quite a low amount of fertilizer in our agriculture, take paddy production, for example, we are still having higher productivity than India, than Bangladesh, and more than most of the South Asian countries. It's Vietnam, China, Japan, Indonesia, they have overruled us. They have gone well above us, mainly because of the volcanic ash soil that they have, because the rich soil has supported their agriculture. The rich soils have supported with nutrition, especially the paddy production that take place in their countries. And more importantly, most of the countries cultivate only one season, and we cultivate 2 seasons. Every time, if we remove 1 ton per hectare of paddy from a paddy field, we'll be removing 21 kilograms of nitrogen. So if you harvest 5 tons per hectare, for example, we'll be removing 105 kilograms of nitrogen just in 1 cultivating season. And we do cultivate for 2 seasons. That means per hectare, we are removing 210 kilograms of nitrogen from soil. What are we doing? We are making soil infertile by harvesting agriculture. And when the paddy from Polonnaruwa is harvested, it's not the people in Polonnaruwa who consume that paddy. That paddy, after being converted into rice, will be consumed by people in Colombo and many other major cities. So the nutrients being moved from one place to the other in terms of harvest. That's exactly what takes place in agriculture. That means you continue to do agriculture, you continue to make the soil infertile. And if you do not provide the removed nutrients in the soil, the land degradation and soil degradation will take place, definitely removing and losing the productivity of agriculture at all costs. Whatever thing that you do thereafter will never yield fruitful results with respect to crop production. That is where the issue is. So please keep that in mind. Sri Lanka is using fertilizer. No argument about that. But in terms of position, we are not a heavy user at this particular moment. This is not to say we have to become a heavy user. No, we have to use this judiciously. We have a lot of other problems to solve in this small country. But then, in terms of use of fertilizer per unit area of cropland, we are at a very low level at this particular stage. I'm still trying to make a point that whatever said and done by many learned people who have infused erroneous ideas to policymakers, I'm going to correct it at least in front of you. We have tried to correct it with the policymakers. Very unfortunately, they listened, but they did not comprehend. That's where the problem is. So let's see what's going to happen in the future. This is the third thing that I'm going to challenge at this particular point. Remember the third bullet point that I showed you? Sri Lanka is a country that used the largest quantity of pesticide among the South Asian countries with respect to agriculture. The publication on left-hand side just came out in 2022. This is the very first time all organic agriculture entities got together and came up with a publication called Pesticide Atlas. And the first volume of the Pesticide Atlas was released in 2022 October. Now, this is what that Pesticide Atlas says, not me. Look at the title that they have given at the top. No reduction to be seen. It's not that anyone else says. These are the people who are into organic agriculture, who have done a very thorough analysis about the use of pesticides in the whole world and coming up with their conclusions, except for EU that has shown just minus 0.2% negative growth over the past 20 years. In all other continents, use of agricultural pesticides have been increasing. Now, do remember, do understand, I'm not trying to create a better picture about pesticides here, but I'm presenting you the facts. If we do understand these facts, the reality, then of course we can make decisions very easily, because we are not being taken on a ride. We know what is there at the ground level, so that it will help us to make judicious decisions, judicious application technologies, for example, for future in improving our agriculture in the long run. That's the whole idea. And that's what I want to let you know with this figure as well. Look at where Sri Lanka is in terms of use of pesticide per unit cropland. Sri Lanka is right here. Of course, many other countries, India, Pakistan, Bhutan, and Nepal, are at a very lower level in terms of pesticide application. But Sri Lanka, it's at a relatively higher level, but Bangladesh is much above us. And do remember, take paddy cultivation, for example. Our average paddy yield before this drastic decision was taken in 2021 was 4.5 metric tons per hectare. India still cannot break the 4 tons per hectare barrier. They are still struggling to break 4 tons per hectare. All their production, total production, is mainly because of sheer extent of cultivation, nothing else. But Sri Lanka, with a very small area of land, 1.3 million hectares only devoted only for paddy cultivation, we have go ahead and earned a lot. And productivity-wise, we have shown how productive our lands are based on the management practices that we conduct, and how good our varieties are as well. So these are just, I think these are eye-openers for many people with respect to these aspects. After looking at those 3 conditions, which I really wanted to present at the very beginning, let's look at the Sri Lankan scenario and agriculture and how decisions have been made and based on what conditions. We always say Sri Lanka has a very diverse environment. If you look at the situations in Sri Lanka, it's like this. Within these 65,610 square kilometers, we have 3 climatic zones, 7 agroclimatic zones, 46 agroecological regions, 7 soil orders. In the whole world, there are only 12 soil orders. Out of that 12, Sri Lanka has 7, more than 200 soil series. And we have the highest density of biodiversity in Asia. We are one of the 34 biodiversity hotspots in the whole world. And approximately 27% of our flowering plants are endemic, only found in Sri Lanka in the natural habitats. And about 22% of the mammals are endemic, only found in Sri Lanka in the natural habitats. Look at the diversity that we have. We can be proud of this, but please do keep in mind, this diversity, on one hand, is a blessing, and on one hand, it gives a lot of problems and troubles, because the diversity itself says the solutions that you find for problems in one location will not be applicable to another, because of the diversity in soil, diversity in agroecological regions, diversity in biodiversity, for example, itself. Now, that is where science will have to come into picture always. If you do not focus on these aspects, whenever the time we make decisions, our agricultural land will be in trouble. It is now in trouble. I'm not trying to say it was not in trouble, but now in serious trouble, which we are trying to revive at this particular time by using science, of course. Changing gears for a while, and moving on to Sri Lanka's economy. Sri Lanka's economy has been growing at a modest rate in most of the time periods, at least starting from the 21st century. But last year, year 2022, our economy contracted by 7.8%, minus 7.8% growth. Our agricultural economy contracted by 4.6%. And our GDP, per capita GDP, you can see the level at which it has come down. And our government is now focusing on 2048, saying that we'll become a developing country in 2048. If that objective is to be achieved, our per capita GDP should be at least $12,000 per annum. It's 4 times higher than we experience right now. So this is something that we have to understand. Where the Sri Lankan situation right now, where the economy is, where the agricultural economy is. Of course, industries and service sectors could not be ignored. And also look at what is happening at the ground level, and based on science, make those decisions that will support and that will help us achieve these targets, even in 25 years' time. So that's a key factor that we have to consider in all these cases. Now, I just want to bring in this slide in between to show you, while we are looking at all these things, even before 2020, this was a decision that was taken in year 2021. Since I've already explained it to you, I'm just to skip this slide quickly. I want to bring this example to you. People ask, in most of the cases from me, when I start talking to many intellectuals, knowing that I am from the field of agriculture, relating to Department of Agriculture. I'm not from the Department of Agriculture, but relating to Department of Agriculture. And it's asking me, what has the Department of Agriculture done over the years? Assuming that they have done nothing. But please do remember, I'm sure all of you must have been consuming kiri samba for some time right now. All of you must have been consuming different types of nadu rice, different types of samba rice varieties. Now, who developed those things? Our own scientists. Thanks to our own scientists, we were able to breed those rice varieties and make sure our rice economy is at a state like this. Do remember, we do not import paddy. Importation paddy is prohibited to Sri Lanka, but we import rice. That means dehusked paddy. So all the seed paddy, the paddy that we plant in the rice fields are produced in country. That's the first thing to keep in mind. A lot of people misunderstand this whole scenario. We only import rice, but not paddy. So not a single paddy, unless it's been smuggled, are being brought in and planted in this country. Section number 2. We do not have hybrid rice in Sri Lanka. A lot of people think what we grow are hybrid rice. No. What we grow, the new high-yielding varieties that we have started developing since 1960s are through normal breeding programs carried out by our own scientists, no one else. And that has made sure the yield of paddy has been increasing like this. In 1940, before the World War, just at the time the World War II started, the statistics that are available very clearly says that the average paddy yield in Sri Lanka at that time, using traditional varieties, using traditional technologies, was merely 650 kilograms per hectare. 8 years later, in 2020, we were producing using new improved varieties with a lot of agricultural technologies being infused to the system, 4,800 kilograms per hectare. From 650, it has jumped into 4,800. And that's the level of development that has taken place in agriculture. Please have a close look at this figure. The red line shows the annual production, and the black line shows the average yield. In 1950, we had only about 1.65 metric tons per hectare, moving up from 1940, which recorded only about 650 kilograms per hectare. And look at everything has been improving, though there have been hiccups, ups and downs. Let's look at what contributed to these ups and downs. Now, this is how it went. The first ever mineral fertilizer import to Sri Lanka was recorded in 1952. The first four-wheel tractor, Massey Ferguson tractor, landed in Sri Lanka in 1953. People allowed mineral fertilizer to be used, but there was social pressure, enormous social pressure, not allowing four-wheel tractor to be used in our paddy fields. The people were arguing at that time, though I was not born, from all the information that have been made available, people are arguing, saying that this yakada yaka will definitely replace the labor and people will start losing job in agriculture if you start using this four-wheel tractor. The first two-wheel tractor landed in Sri Lanka in 1962. Still the same story. But if you go to the paddy fields right now, it's very difficult even to find a land that will not use even a two-wheel tractor to do land preparation. If you go to many paddy fields in and around Colombo, Gampaha, Piliandala, Kaluthara, Gaul, you can always see combine harvesters, miniaturized combine harvesters being used to harvest paddy in most of the cases. So our front end and the tail end of paddy production has been mechanized. But our own people did not allow that to happen about 70 years ago, when the first four-wheel tractor landed in Sri Lanka and first two-wheel tractor landed in Sri Lanka for agricultural purposes. Interestingly, the chief executive office of Bowers, A. Bower and Company, was showing me a slide one day. Truly speaking, the first four-wheel tractor has landed in Sri Lanka in 1919, 1919, soon after the World War I. That has been brought into a coconut plantation, which was managed by A. Bower at that time. And he was using it, but people still did not allow him to use it for general agriculture purposes, fearing that people will start losing jobs. And even at this time, starting from 1990, more than 100 years have passed by. We are still talking about mechanization of agriculture in this country. That's a pathetic scenario. Very unfortunate that Sri Lanka has been pushed into such a situation. But my point is different. Mineral fertilizers, 1952. You know about the famous H4 variety, which changed the whole ball game in Sri Lanka. H4 is a variety that was developed by Sri Lankan scientists, Sri Lankan breeders. What they did was they got one part of the genetics from the traditional variety called Murungakayan 302. The next part of the genetics came from an Indonesian variety called MAS. So this Indonesian variety MAS, Sri Lankan variety called Murungakayan 302 was combined together to develop H4. A lot of people did not know that there's foreign gene in H4. Very fortunately, that's why H4 started getting cultivated even during late 1950s. But looking at the success, Sri Lankan breeders went forward and they made sure there are a lot of new high-yielding varieties, new improved varieties started being developed since 1965. We speak of BG varieties, Kottegoda. We speak of AT varieties from Ambalathota, LD varieties from Labuduwa, and BW varieties from Bombuela. All are products of our own scientists. So who can argue and challenge saying that our Department of Agriculture has not done any work? They have contributed immensely. But of course, there are drawbacks and shortcomings, which we have to understand. But going further, you can still see there are a lot of things that have happened in Sri Lanka with respect to agriculture. The first ever fertilizer subsidy was introduced in 1962. That's how things started. Fertilizer was introduced to paddy cultivation in 1952. 10 years later, the first fertilizer subsidy program came into picture to support agriculture under the name of Green Revolution, fortunately or unfortunately. You can also see, I'm sure there are a lot of dips in the progress. The rice production, paddy production has progressed, as you see. But there are a lot of dips when time passes by. What are these dips? It's mainly because of climate change, mainly because of drought. And most of these years were El Nino years. 2023 is an El Nino year. That's why we were worried. Remember the two photographs that I showed you in the first slide? The bottom two, where people were crying foul, requesting for irrigation water because of a prolonged drought condition. And the Department of Meteorology has specifically said that this prolonged drought or prolonged dry period is mainly because of the El Nino impact, because this year has been declared as an El Nino year by World Meteorology Organization. That's where the most important part to understand right at this particular stage is. Now, this dip is something different. That dip is because of the policy decision. You can look at the way the dips have taken place in the era of progression with respect to paddy yields in Sri Lanka. In 2022 alone, our paddy production was reduced by 34%. And that's a pathetic story. Sri Lanka had to import 783,000 metric tons of rice in 2022 alone to feed our nation, spending $292 million at a time that we required foreign currency very badly. But Sri Lanka had to spend in order to feed the nation. Unfortunate scenario. Look at what's happened in the past with respect to rice imports, and look at what happened in 2022 with respect to rice imports. Sri Lanka has been importing rice continuously. We have to import basmati. We have to import Thailand jasmine rice because we cannot grow them to have a higher yield. And we have a tourism industry. Tourists demand for rice varieties like that. So in order to feed that population, Sri Lanka had to import rice. Take India, for example, take China. China is the highest rice producer in the whole world, but they still import rice. India is the highest rice exporter in the whole world, but they still import rice. So this trade works out in such a way to make sure the balance is maintained always. You support many other countries, and of course, you make sure your trade balance is also being kept positive. But these are the scenarios that we all have to understand what has happened in Sri Lanka. Look at what happened to maize because of the unfortunate decision that we took in 2021. Maize cultivation was reduced by 65% in 2021. What is the repercussion? When maize cultivation goes down, we have to keep in mind 80% of the maize produced in Sri Lanka is for animal feed production. When animal feed production loses its most important raw material, that means the poultry industry is affected because 95% of the animal feed produced in Sri Lanka goes for poultry industry. And you know what has happened in the recent past. The egg prices shot up. The chicken prices, was sky high. And more importantly, Sri Lanka is now importing eggs from India, and license have been granted even to import chicken meat from India. Fortunately, to the best of my knowledge, until the time I'm speaking right now, not a single kilogram of chicken meat have been imported yet, but things can take place in the future. The biggest issue is like this. When there's shortage of food, you feel the hunger right now. You feel the pressure right now. But when there's protein malnutrition, you see the pressure in 3 years' time. By that time, the bus is gone. You know, a midday meal for a school children until 2022, the price tag given for a midday meal was 60 rupees per meal for a kid. But egg price alone went up to 72 rupees. So how can we speak of nutritious food in Sri Lanka, for example, when such things happen? This is the continuum that we have to look into. Crop production is not only for crop yields. Crop production is for animal production as well, because it provides the much needed raw material for animal feed and of course for production of meat, milk and eggs, which in turn will be consumed by people. That's where this link has to be maintained. If we are to come out of the problem of malnutrition and undernutrition, forget about the normal hunger that we speak of. 2017, this was the yield reduction that we observed. And in 2022, because of this unfortunate decision, we had a 65% reduction in maize yield. This is a third slide I'm going to show you about what has happened with respect to crops. I spoke to you about paddy, which is the most important food crop for us. I spoke to you about maize, the most important animal feed crop. This slide is devoted for tea crop, which is the most important export agricultural crop in Sri Lanka. Let's look at what has happened to the tea crop. In 2020, we manufactured 279 million kilograms of black tea and green tea together. I'm talking about the manufactured tea. This is how the tea production, the manufactured tea production chain, these are data from Sri Lanka Tea Board. Okay, so this is how the tea production changed. If you look at the COVID, this dip is because of the COVID. COVID lockdown took place in March, and you can see from that point, the tea production once again gradually increased thanks to the policy decision taken by the government of Sri Lanka at that time. Despite a lockdown, people who are in the agriculture profession were allowed to work freely. And that's one of the scenarios why people were able to come to work and make sure tea plucking is done. 2021, the year that this very ill-fated decision was taken, we produced 299 million kilograms of manufactured tea. So people are happy in saying that the decision did not have any impact because in 2020, it was 278 million. In 2021, it was 299 million. But look at what has happened exactly. The tea production during the first 5 months increased dramatically. And thereafter, the decline started. And when did we take the decision to ban importation of fertilizer? That was in May. Look at what has happened, what the repercussions are, for example, with respect to manufacturers' tea production in Sri Lanka. What is in black is what we experienced in 2022. I met the chairperson of the Ceylon, Sri Lanka's Tea Factory Association. He was telling me the amount of foreign exchange that we have lost because of low production of manufactured tea in 2022 was $238 million US. Remember the statistic that I gave you earlier? To import rice, we have spent $292 million US. If you combine those two things together, we have lost $500 million US in just 1 year for nothing, for no reason. Had those bad decisions were not taken, at least in terms of food production, we are a well-off country even at this stage. We are struggling to purchase food from India, for example. I do not know whether that luxury will be there in the future. Just a month ago, India banned export of rice. India is the largest exporter of rice, and India accounts for about 40% of the rice market in the whole world, except for basmati type rice. India banned export of all other types of rice. So if we do not have our agriculture prosper at this particular time, even if we have US dollars in hand, if there's a shortage of food, we'll be in trouble in order to find a place to import rice. I do remember in 2009, when there was a world food price crisis, Sri Lankan government had to go to Myanmar to negotiate to purchase rice because India stopped exporting rice in the world food price crisis, the price crisis that was there in 2009. You know what Myanmar did? At that time, the world market price of rice is about $342 per metric ton. Myanmar gave us rice, but at a price of 1,100 US dollars per metric tons of rice. Now, this is where the bargaining powers come in. This is where the trade take place. This is where the benefits are being extracted, whatever the conditions, no matter, prevailing in the whole world with respect to food security and so on. Shifting gears once again. I just want to come to the water factor. Very soon I'll be completing my presentation as well. When you talk about water, we cannot simply forget about climate change. Climate change is real. It's happening. It's not a myth, but a fact. That's something that we have to remember. The scientists have proven beyond doubt the climate change is mainly because of industrial revolution, or in other words, human beings' contribution to so-called development that have made sure high levels of greenhouse gases being emitted to the environment. What is in store for future in Sri Lanka with respect to climate change? This is what the Ministry of Environment's recent publication says. The wet seasons are going to be wetter and dry seasons are going to be drier. Had the wet season become little drier and dry season become little wetter, our agriculture would prosper. But unfortunately, that is not what's going to happen. We are in the wet zone right now, and you saw the amount of rainfall that was there from morning today. The tail end of the southwest monsoon has got activated after about 2.5 months of dry period, thanks to the El Nino effect. So we are experiencing that heavy rains right now. Farmers started cultivating late in many parts of the country. And at the time they were to harvest, there was a very strong drought, and that affected their yield. Soon after harvesting, they want to dry their paddy along the roadside. Here comes rain, that affecting the drying of paddy. So they get affected from all corners. Only way to come out of this is proper planning, the point that I will coming back to you as my penultimate slide in this presentation. So please do remember, things are not going in favor of Sri Lankans, especially with respect to food security. Wetter parts will be wetter. More water is more trouble. Drier parts is going to be drier. Less water is also trouble, but much better than having more water when you look at agriculture. Still, we are partly safe when you look at that situation, but the problem continues. I will skip this particular slide. I don't want to go ahead, although I wanted to explain certain things, but please do keep in mind there's something called El Nino, which is not due to climate change, which is a natural phenomenon that takes place once in every 3 to 7 years. The last El Nino hit Sri Lanka in 2015, 2016. That's where we had to import rice. Now this year, we are very cautious to make sure, advising the government to do proper planning and implement those plans if you want to get rid of the impact of El Nino, especially in next year. Now, this is what the people or farming community in the Udawalawe area experienced. Lack of water at the time they most needed water. The interesting point is, I still don't understand, ladies and gentlemen, why policymakers could not make this simple decision by having a proper coordination among institutes. Udawalawe is for irrigation purposes only, irrigation purposes and human and animal consumption. People were shouting slogans asking the government to allow Samanalawe to release water to Udawalawe. But Samanalawe is managed by Ceylon Electricity Board and was built purely for hydroelectricity generation. You see the conflicts, where the conflicts come up. But had people start coordinating among each other, Department of Agriculture, Department of Agrarian Development, Ministry of Agriculture, and Ceylon Electricity Board, the problem would have sorted much earlier. Farmers started asking for water since early July. They were given water in late August. For what purpose? No one knows. But still, at least some amount of water were given to them to support their agriculture. Lack of coordination. That's the unfortunate part. This is the yield loss that we have right now. The yield loss that we have right now. According to the statistics, when you look at the loss of extents of paddy cultivation, it is very, very clear that Sri Lanka will be losing about 100,000 metric tons of rice, thanks to this 2-month drought period that we had. 100,000 metric tons of rice. That's about 65,000 metric tons of milled rice. That's when you lose paddy, the conversion factor is 65% when you want to mill it to up to rice. So that is the scenario right now. But still, the Department of Agriculture has come up with their data to say that despite this loss, year 2023, we will have a paddy yield that can be milled into rice and provide the rice requirement of Sri Lankans for little over 12 months. That is the good news, or whatever said and done. So that indicates we need not import rice until December 31st, but not beyond that. We have to think, plan very carefully until the next harvest come in to make sure our people will have the required quantity of food to eat. This is what I said a little while ago. When people harvest rice, they started drying it along the roads. Then comes this unexpected rain because of activation of the tail end of the monsoon. So the paddy start becoming wet, and this is exactly what will happen at the end. The paddy will not be in a position to be milled and to be marketed as rice. So they're being hit at all ends, very unfortunately. So what can be done? All those are problems. Problems can be easily explained because there's enough data to show the problems and convince people, saying that we can estimate the losses, we can always say these are the yield losses and so on, but what solutions are going to be there? The most important point, as I told you, with respect to release of water from Samanala, the lesson that we learn is that unless there's engagement of all stakeholders, not only stakeholders in agriculture, all stakeholders, the problems with respect to agriculture will continue to take place as we have experienced in the past. There's a problem on research extension linkage. Due to 13th Amendment, agriculture extension has been devolved to the provincial councils. Research stay with the national government, extension mainly stays with the provincial setup. Unless there's a proper coordination and linkages between these two, message coming from the research division will not reach the farmers at the end, who are mainly working under the provincial setup. Then support agriculture research and technology development. That should be a high national priority in the future with national budgets. And government should start moving out of agricultural business or agribusinesses, especially input providing business. Let the private sector handle it, but make sure government is going to be the watchdog. Have all those rules and regulations set to ensure you safeguard not only the producer, but also the consumer and the environment as well. Then you have to promote private-public producer partnership, as I told you. And the most important recommendation that we are giving right now, please pass this message to anyone, especially those people who start paddy cultivation in the Maha season, starting from October rains. Please ask them to start land preparation on time with rains. And don't ask them to wait until the reservoir started issuing water for cultivation. That is waste of rainwater, waste of storage. So never allow that to happen. Please pass this message. I've been telling Department of Agriculture, if you cannot do extension, if there's shortage of staff, at least use these people. When they start talking about Pattare Vistare and give newspaper announcement in the morning of every day, let them spell out just one sentence with respect to this timing of cultivation, so that at least the message will get across majority in this country. That's going to be an important aspect. Conclusion of my presentation, the last slide. I'm here to deliver the Kottegoda Oration. I'm talking about agriculture, a totally different field of study than what Professor S.R. Kottegoda was following and of course devoting his time and serving the society. But there are messages that we can brought back into this overall affair, looking at Professor Kottegoda's conduct, way that I heard about him from his colleagues and of course from his students. Those are the most important things that went into my mind. It's lack of professionalism and ethical conduct that has severely damaged the already progressing agriculture sector in this country. Instead, agricultural scientists advising the government is the Buddhist monks and neurologists went and gave advice to the government with respect to agriculture. And unfortunately, government policymakers started buying them. At what cost? You and me, we all have dreams in our cases. If we try to realize our own dreams from my own money, then of course there's no problem. But when you try to realize unrealistic dreams are unrealistic in most of the cases, but these unrealistic scenarios using public money. And that is the sorry state we are in right now. So that professionalism, that professional conduct, and that ethical conduct is extremely important. And government of Sri Lanka, we have done mistakes in the past, but in the future, should consider the scientific evidence in making its decisions in the agriculture sector, not only in the agriculture sector, in all other sectors, and all the activities should be well coordinated at the ground level. Easier said than done, I do understand. When you have a large number of entities working, mandated to serve with respect to agriculture in this country at the national government and as well as at the provincial setup level. It is not too late for policymakers to listen to the professionals in the respective fields, comprehend the ideas, presented to them and act upon them. The more important thing, the message that I'm going to pass to everyone is that let's start believing in science. Let's start think science and let's start doing science. Thank you very much for your patience listening.
Just a personal word of thanks to Professor Marambe for a really very, very enlightening and thought-provoking talk. And with that, I would like to invite our General President-elect, Professor Ramani Wijesekara, to propose a vote of thanks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasant task this evening to acknowledge and thank all who helped to make this event a success. Having an echo? Is there an echo? First and foremost, our sincere thanks to the Kottegoda family, whose generosity over the years has made this important event possible. We are delighted that all of you were able to be here today. I would like to take this opportunity to remember Mrs. Kottegoda, whose presence always added grace and elegance to this event. To our orator today, Professor Buddhi Marambe, our sincere thanks for braving the weather to travel to Colombo for this occasion. As always, your talk had our undivided attention. Thank you. Our thanks also to the General Presidents of the SLAAS. General President of the SLAAS, Professor Ranjit Senaratne. The Vice Chairperson of the Ethics Committee, Professor Udeni Navagamwa, for introducing our orator today, and the Ethics Committee, chaired by Professor Manuj Veerasinghe, for organizing this event. I would especially like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Menaka Ranasinghe, Secretary of the Ethics Committee, for her hard work behind the scenes to coordinate today's program. We greatly appreciate the participation of the general past presidents of SLAAS. It always adds something special to an event to see you there. We also thank the office staff of the SLAAS for their assistance. And thank you, Dr. R.D. Gunaratne, for being the MC today. Finally, our thanks to all of you for being here today to make this a memorable occasion for us. Have a pleasant evening.
Apropos of having a pleasant evening, I think a start to a pleasant evening is some refreshments, which I believe are served in the usual place here, courtesy of the Kottegoda family. So please enjoy them. Thank you all very much.
Awesome.